Hello, welcome to our genealogy program today. We are so glad that you're able to join us, but today we're going to be hearing from one of our very own. Today we get to hear from Kate McKenzie. She is giving us our introductory to genealogy research program, and we are so glad to have her today. She's a native of Cincinnati, Ohio. She has a bachelor's degree in library informatics with a minor in history. She has a certification in genealogical research from Boston University and a master's of library and information science. So she is very well versed in our genealogy research, and I am very excited to hear from her today. So thank you, Kate.
Hello, and thank you everyone again for joining us today. So we'll explore the basics of genealogy research today, and our focus will be on initiating your research journey, discovering record sources, and we'll explore an array of tools and resources that'll be tailored to help you dive in. So why do genealogy research? There are a lot of motivations, and maybe you want to discover the town that your ancestors hailed from in France or Germany, Italy, Greece, or a number of other countries. Maybe you want to solve a family mystery or uncover previously unknown ancestors, or even create a deeper connection with living relatives. So you might want to learn more about your family's medical history or pass down the family genealogy to younger generations, to your children or your grandchildren. When I began, one of my personal motivations was to uncover and to learn more about the paternal side of my family and origins in Ukraine there. So there are many motivations and many reasons to begin researching, and it can be very rewarding. So whatever your initial motivation might be, learning more about your family history, you can really gain a deeper understanding of your ancestors' experiences and accomplishments. So our aim is not only to unveil the names and dates of our ancestors' births, marriages, and deaths, but also to unearth the rich stories of our families. So you'll want to start with what you know, and this is a pedigree chart or ancestral chart. This one was downloaded from Ancestry Library Edition, and there are many similar charts available online to download for free. I've included a link to some of those in the handout, and so you can start to fill in information that you know. You'll start with yourself, jot down your parents' names, dates and places of birth and marriage, and repeat the process for filling in this background information for your grandparents and your great-grandparents. And don't be too concerned if you encounter several gaps in information, because that's where the research will come into play. So if possible, consider conducting interviews with older family members, especially in the initial stages. Your relatives can serve as really valuable sources of information. And these interviews could take place in person, on the phone, or even through written letters. You could ask about their recollections of older family members that they knew, any individuals in the family who spoke a foreign language, or details about the family's religious affiliation, place of worship, exploring their schooling experiences, occupations of their parents, or just any significant childhood memories can also yield some really valuable insights. You might also discover that family members possess genealogy-related documents like marriage records, death certificates, letters, or maybe narratives about the family. So each of these items can offer valuable hints as you start your research journey. And these stories or anecdotes can then be recorded and then preserved for future generations. So if you're beginning to record your family history, another chart that'll be helpful is a family group chart. A pedigree chart primarily focuses on displaying the direct lineage of a single individual. So it traces the ancestry of a particular person, often starting from them and then working backward to their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and so on. And a family group sheet, on the other hand, it focuses on presenting an overview of an entire family unit. So it includes parents, children, aunts, uncles, cousins. So with these charts, there's space to record birth, marriage, and death dates and places, cause of death, the name of the church where events may have taken place, and so on. So family group charts supplement the pedigree chart, and they offer an opportunity to document the broader context of the family's history, including interactions between different members and the structure of the family lines over time. So now you're ready to prepare to research. So you'll want to familiarize yourself with research tools that can aid in your quest. So these tools might encompass online databases, local archives, and genealogy software, which we'll talk about in a moment. So it's recommended that you begin your research by focusing on one side of your family, either paternal or maternal. And this approach, it can be good to be able to streamline the process a little bit, and it minimizes the opportunity to become overwhelmed as you start searching for records in various generations. So as you get into your family history, formulating research questions can prove to be helpful. And these questions help to maintain focus and give you some direction during your research. So genealogical research questions usually revolve around aspects of identity or relationship, and at times they can relate to specific circumstances surrounding the family. So an identity-oriented question in genealogy would focus on elements that define an individual, like the birth date, birthplace, parents' names, spouse, children, anything that makes them unique. So for instance, an example would be the question, who's the mother of Henry Adams, born in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1911? So this question has enough specificity regarding the location and the date, and that enhances the focus and the likelihood of a successful research outcome. And during the course of your research, one question will probably trigger multiple others. So you could inquire, was the John Smith who resided in New York in the early 1900s the same individual as the John Smith who later relocated to California and passed away there in the 1940s, or maybe they were distinct persons sharing the same name. So the question regarding identity might arise when you have records that suggest two similarly detailed John Smiths in different locations, but the aim is to determine whether they're the same person or separate individuals. So addressing the question will involve collecting additional records and evidence, like birth and death certificates, census records, things like that, to establish a conclusive link or to differentiate the individuals. A question concerning relationship could be, what is the relationship between John Smith, born 1805, and Mary Johnson, born in 1812, who both lived in Springfield, Illinois? So in this scenario, the research goal is to find the specific connection between John Smith and Mary Johnson, and the existence of records or other evidence that hint at a potential relationship, like shared residences or common acquaintances, that could be the driving force behind the question. And investigating further seeks to establish the precise relationship, whether they were siblings or cousins, spouses, or even if there was no familial connection. So answering this relationship question would involve examining various sources, again, like censuses, birth, marriage, and death certificates, or other pertinent documents. But as you begin to develop your research questions and dive in, it's also important to determine how you would like to organize your research and document your findings. Before we get to documentation, I just wanted to touch on the genealogical proof standard. So genealogy research involves locating records to prove birthplaces and dates, marriages, burials, cause of death, and lots more. But it doesn't mean much if you don't have the credible sources and the records to back up your findings. So the genealogical proof standard, it's a set of guidelines that are used to establish accurate genealogical conclusions, and it was developed by the Board for Certification of Genealogists to provide a consistent framework for evaluating evidence, conducting research, and drawing conclusions about family relationships. And on their website, they have a good quote that says, both professional genealogists and casual family researchers need genealogy standards in order to get their genealogy right, because without standards, inaccuracies and myths can be created and perpetuated. So many of these errors can be avoided by working with these standards in mind. So just by keeping these elements in the back of your mind, you can work to create reliable research. So there are 5 elements of the genealogical proof standard, and the first one is conducting a reasonably exhaustive search for all of the relevant records and sources related to your research question. And then you want to collect and cite complete and accurate information from your sources. So we won't spend time on crafting formal citations, but linked in the handout are a couple of resources. There's a great book by Elizabeth Schoen Mills called Evidence Explained, which we have available here at the Genealogy Center. And it's a great resource because it shows you how you can cite a variety of records, whether they're in book form or microfilm, or if they come from an online source. But when downloading or printing out records from databases like Ancestry or Family Search or wherever you find the information, it's always a good idea to make sure you save or print out the source information that accompanies the record. So the third element of the genealogical proof standard is to analyze and to correlate the information and the evidence that you've collected. You want to assess its quality and the relevance to your research. So you're analyzing to make sure to the best of your ability that the records that you have are in fact for your ancestor and not somebody else with the same name in the same place. So asking yourself, do the dates, places, and people, does it all kind of jive together? What are the outlying pieces of information? And then the fourth element involves resolving any of that conflicting evidence that you have or any discrepancies between sources. And then the last part is to form a sound conclusion. So I just wanted to mention the genealogical proof standard because these are helpful steps to remember to make your research as accurate and reliable as you can. And if you're interested in learning more, there are a couple of links in the handout. So to maximize your success, it's good to develop an efficient filing system to accompany your research. So there are a number of options out there, and you might opt for a binder system and preserve paper copies of your records. And you could use the pedigree charts and family group sheets that we mentioned earlier, or you could construct a family tree on platforms like Ancestry or utilize a genealogy software like Family Tree Maker. Another option would be to leverage tools like Google Drive to upload records and then create distinct folders for each generational branch. So we won't get too much into organizing your research today, but feel free to experiment as you begin and find the method that works best for you. So we mentioned citations and keeping the source information along with the records. And along with this, maintaining a research log can be helpful. So there's one there at the right, and a number of free research logs are available to download online, including the one here, which is from Ancestry. So on the research calendar's header, you can jot down the name of the person or the family that you're researching, And then to the left of the table, you can jot down the date where you access the resource, the book's call number or microfilm details, a description of the source like the database name and then the specific collection within it. And then you can fill in a time frame and the names that you search for. And then the column for results allows you to record your findings, whether your search was successful, remained inconclusive, or if you stumbled upon a lead that looks promising but might require further research. So documenting it this way, it enables easy reference for further exploration of the source, and it also saves you time so that you won't repeat sources or repeat searches that you've already done. Backing up your data is also important. So you'll want to safeguard records across multiple platforms if you can. Maybe you could use an external hard drive or Google Drive, because losing extensive research due to a computer failure or flash drive failure would be really disappointing. So maintaining organization and backing up your data is important to secure all of the research and the work that you've done. So that kind of establishes our groundwork for getting set up and getting started. So now we can get more into the research process. So where can you locate records? These are a few of the major players in genealogy research. So everybody's probably heard of ancestry.com, and it is a critical tool to include in your research, but it's also crucial to have a variety of resources, to use a variety of tools, both digital and physical, because not all records are going to be housed in a single location. So often finding specific records might require a bit of searching or even sometimes a substantial amount of sleuthing. So platforms like Ancestry, MyHeritage, FamilySearch, these databases serve as good starting points because they have vast amounts of information and records. Find My Past is a UK-based database, and it focuses in British, Irish, and Scottish research, and is also valuable for Catholic records. They've partnered with a number of US dioceses, so they have lots of sacramental records, baptisms, church marriages, and things like that. And additionally, they also offer a wide range of records from the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and a number of other countries too. So Fold3 is another database, and that's kind of a hub for military-focused records. So you can perform searches for your Civil War veterans, Revolutionary War pension files, and a number of other military records there. Historic newspapers also hold a lot of value for genealogy research. So databases like newspapers.com, Newspaper Archive, America's Genealogy Bank, these all grant access to extensive collections of historical newspapers. And these databases do require subscriptions, but they can be accessed for free on site here at the Genealogy Center and local libraries as well. I also wanted to highlight FamilySearch.org, which is a free website that you can use from home, along with its research wiki, which we'll talk about in a minute. So then turning to physical resources, the Genealogy Center is here to support your research. So toward the end of the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about how you can explore our resources, and then again, local libraries and historical societies in the areas where you're researching where your ancestors lived will be helpful, because they'll have records and information that'll be unique to that area and might not be accessible anywhere else. Published local histories are also great sources of information. You'll want to use additional primary sources as well, because local histories were often written years after the events took place, but often there is biographical information included about early settlers, so you might get lucky and find some stories about your ancestors written there. And they can also provide context about what the community was like at the time and give you some clues related to additional places to look for records. So checking out published local histories for the town or county where your ancestors from is good as well. So now we'll talk about types of records. So again, in genealogy, a variety of sources are used to piece together a family's history. So this is a list of some of the most common records that you'll find or search for in genealogy, but there are many, many more. So starting with vital records, these will include births, marriages, and deaths, and they're sometimes referred to as civil registration records. It's worth noting that these will vary from state to state. So for instance, Ohio did not mandate statewide birth registration until 1908. So that means that you might still encounter birth records predating that year that could have been recorded by individual cities or counties, but their availability can be really inconsistent until the state mandated registration. So we'll talk about strategies for identifying existing records and accessing their locations. Census records are the next significant type of record that you'll utilize to trace your ancestors. And the United States has conducted a national census every 10 years since 1790. So census records include a broad array of demographic information, and they can provide a really interesting snapshot of your ancestors' lives. So there is a 72-year rule, and that mandates restricted access to census data for 72 years after enumeration, and this is to protect the privacy of living individuals. So the most recent accessible census is the 1950 census, and that one was released in April 2022. The next release will be for the 1960 census, and that'll be available in 2032. So census data from 1790 to 1950 is pretty much available with one general exception, and that is the 1890 census. It's predominantly unavailable due to a fire that damaged its population schedules in 1921. So there are some fragments that survived, but they're really scarce, so it makes it unlikely that you'll find your family in the 1890 census. There are alternative sources that may be available to track your ancestors during that era, though. So additional resources at your disposal might include city directories, military records, court records, church documents, immigration and naturalization records, obituaries, newspaper articles, cemetery records, wills, and a number of other historical documents. So there are lots of databases to explore, but how can you ascertain where you can access these specific record types? So the place where I would recommend to begin is by looking into the Family Search wiki pages. So while you're on familysearch.org, you can navigate up to the top at the search button. So when you click on it, you'll see a drop-down menu, and at the top is the records option. And you can choose to access the primary search page and search for ancestors by name there. But for now, we're going to opt for the research wiki, which is located at the bottom. And so you'll be directed to a page that looks like this. And you can kind of imagine Family Search, the wiki pages, is a genealogy themed Wikipedia. And these pages encompass a really vast collection of articles. There's over 100,000 available. And these are meant to assist you in your research. So to navigate, you have the option of utilizing the map there. It's interactive, so you can click on the location of your ancestor's residence. There's also the search bar, and you can search for the county or the state where your ancestor lived. Searching by topic is also available. So as an example, if you we're looking for United States military records that were accessible online. You can search those keywords and you'll discover an article that's designed to guide you to those records and where you can find them. So for this example, I did a search for Ohio genealogy, which led me to this page. And there are a couple things that I wanted to highlight. So first, under the Getting Started section at the left, you'll see articles that offer some insights on researching specifically in Ohio. So these will provide information about record keeping practices that are unique to Ohio, the establishment of state mandated birth and death records, and links to databases that'll allow online access and searching of these collections. So I also wanted to draw your attention to the section on the right, which details various record types. And you'll find articles guiding you to cemetery records, court records, obituaries, and a number of other resources. And these are all tailored specifically to the state. So if I had an immigrant ancestor who settled in Ohio, I might be interested in checking the naturalization and citizenship article. So here you can see that the article links to databases where you can find various collections concerning Ohio naturalizations. And then it's not visible here in this screenshot, but the page extends and there's additional details toward the bottom with information regarding the accessibility of these records and a history of how these records were kept over time, which can inform how you might search for them as well. So kind of in summary, the Family Search Wiki pages are a great place to start in identifying available records. And there's also a set of books published by the National Genealogical Society called Research in the States, which is a similar concept, but it's in book form. So I think they've published just over 30 of those, and I've linked their website in the handout so that you can see the listing of which books are available. You can also search our Genealogy Center catalog for those as well. So I've listed a few other guidebooks that can help with identifying resources and repositories in the handout too. And so now getting into the records. So let's say I've conducted my interviews with my family members, I've gathered some background information, and I've completed my pedigree chart, and now I'm ready to do some research. So again, it's probably best to take a focused approach when getting started and just consider one branch at a time and opt for either your maternal or paternal lineage as a starting point. And you can always shift over to the other side of the family when you're ready. So you can take a look at your pedigree chart and start to formulate some of those research questions. So this is a 1930 census, and this documents my great-grandfather. So this is what the full page of the original image looks like. And it's always important to examine and to analyze the original image of any record that you locate, because the original will convey more information than what's indexed. So the census records, they offer insights into various aspects of a person's life. They will tell you approximate ages, residence location, and details, which people were living in the household with them, their education status, birthplaces. They might even provide information about foreign origins or immigration years and naturalization status if that was applicable to your relative. So this census information can unlock really valuable details about your ancestors and can guide you to additional records like previous censuses or naturalization documents or passenger lists and things like that. So I do want to acknowledge that records like including index information is not infallible. So this is true for censuses and other record types as well. The information that was recorded, it was only as reliable and accurate as the person who was transcribing it or providing it. So it's important to evaluate each record and correlate the information with other records that you found. So it will be really common to identify misspellings, especially in these older documents where spelling conventions weren't as standardized as they are today. So for instance, in this index information for the 1930 census, my great-grandfather, his parents are listed as Harry and Anna, although the last name is misspelled and his birth year is slightly off. So there's a couple discrepancies, but analyzing the record reveals he's in Wheeling, West Virginia, as I expected, roughly the correct age, and he's in the company of his brothers, Harry and Anna. So analyzing the record, I'm able to confirm that it is in fact my ancestor. So I created a chart here detailing my great-grandfather's appearances in the censuses from 1920 to 1950 alongside his baptismal record. And I just wanted to spotlight some of the types of discrepancies or inaccuracies that you might find. And across these documents, there are some inaccuracies with the spelling of the surname. So the 1940 census is the only time where the last name is spelled correctly. In terms of locations, birth year, and the listing of his parents being Harry and Anna, we see consistency. There is one census entry that falsely lists his father as John, so that's our outlier. And in the column on the right, I documented the additional household members. His brothers were Harry and John, so that might explain where that error came from, but it just kind of highlights the importance of amassing a range of records to trace your ancestors and collect evidence to resolve any of the outlying information that you have. So next are vital records. So we'll start with births. And again, each state is different. So where Ohio began statewide registration of births and deaths in 1908, Kentucky started a couple of years later in 1911, and it usually took a few years for the states to reach full compliance with recording this information. So you'll want to check the Family Search Wiki for the area where you're researching to get an idea of when these records started to become available and where you can access them. If your ancestor was born before the state kept records, you could also check at the county or city level again, because many areas kept their own records before the state took over. So there are Family Search Wiki pages for counties, so you'll want to check into those too to see if there are listings for other resources for birth records. So the one at the right is an example of this. This is the birth for Cornelius James McCloy, and he was born in Cincinnati in 1894. And Cincinnati kept their own birth and death records that span from the 1860s up until about 1912, which was a few years after Ohio implemented registration. So these were written in ledger books originally, which you can see a reference to there. It was on page 192. But the health department transferred them to note cards a few decades ago to preserve the information while still holding on to the ledger books. So these are all now digitized and they're searchable at the University of Cincinnati, their rare book library website. So it's an example of a birth record that you could find before statewide registration was mandated. And the birth record at the left is 1923 birth record for Ruth Schmid, and it's not the original, but it's a copy that was ordered from the state, from the health department. So it gives her parents' names, William and Mary, and their birthplaces, which were Germany and Ohio. So these birth records are important because they provide essential details like the full name of the individual, the date of birth, place of birth, parental information is provided. Sometimes you'll find the birthplace, occupation, or the age of the parents included as well. So for Cornelius's birth at the right, we can see that he was born on October 5th, 1894, to James McCloy and Elizabeth Corboy. And his mom was from Ohio and his father was from Ireland, and he worked as a policeman. So all of these clues are great to be able to continue to trace Cornelius's line back. Next are marriages. So marriage records should typically provide the name of the bride and groom, the marriage date and location, the marital status, if either person was single, widowed, divorced, the occupations of the bride and groom, the names of their parents, maybe witnesses, and the person who officiated the marriage. So usually the more recent a record is, the more detailed information it'll have. And the record on the right is a little too small to see the details of, but it's the marriage record for Cornelius, James McCloy, and Pauline McCloy. So it's dated May 1922, and this record gives their full names, ages, and their occupations. So he was recorded as Cornelius James McCloy, age 26, and he worked as a dentist. She was recorded as Pauline Mildred Carter, and she was a nurse at the time of their marriage. So this record gives Pauline's birthplace as Russellville, Ohio, and her parents as Eugene Carter and Florence Shaw. Cornelius's parents were recorded as James McCloy and Bridget Corboy, which matches his birth record that we saw on the last slide. So there's a lot of valuable genealogical information in that marriage record. The marriage record on the left is a marriage between J.F. Woodfin and Juliet Montgomery, and their marriage took place on July 18th, 1862 in Tennessee. So you can kind of see the, kind of observe the difference between an 1862 Tennessee marriage and then a 1922 Ohio marriage. So again, the bride and groom's names are at the left, date of marriage is in the center, and then on the right, there's a name. It's Henry Miller, and his name was listed under a column with the heading of security, if you look at the full record. So, and that referred to a person who would vouch to be liable for a sum of money if the marriage failed to take place, which was pretty common in southern states at that time. The person was usually a friend or a relative of the groom. So for this marriage record, the information is just limited to that small amount shown here. So marriage records, they generally begin at the establishment of the county. So when you're trying to locate a marriage record for your ancestors, it's also important to examine their place of residence. It's possible that your ancestors might have lived within 2 or even 3 counties during their lifetime, despite not physically moving because of shifting county boundaries and the creation of new counties. So keep that in mind and explore the historical context and formation of the area, because that'll inform where you'll find the records. So the last type of vital record are death records. So this record on the right is a standard death certificate that you might find. Death certificates typically offer lots of valuable information. They'll provide the age at death, the cause of death, place of residence at the time of their death, maybe the name of the hospital where the death happened, typically the name of the cemetery where interment took place, and a number of other details that can serve as good clues as you work through your research. So in this case, the death certificate is for Mary Schmid, and the record gives a lot of good information. So her date of death is recorded as November 14th, 1933. She died at the age of 46. It lists her residence and the names of her parents. So they were August Bronner and Margaret Minton, and the cause of death was recorded as a massive cerebral hemorrhage. So the certificate also mentions that she's buried at Old St. Joseph Cemetery in Cincinnati. So now that I have that information, I might want to pursue cemetery records as well. And so while you're assessing these records, it's important to keep in mind that the accuracy of the information, it hinges upon the reliability of the informant. So in this case, her husband, William Schmid, he was listed as the informant on her death certificate. And he provided all of that information. And so since the informant was her husband, that does imply a certain level of trustworthiness in the information, but it is still a good idea to kind of corroborate and substantiate the details by seeking some additional records, especially if you have a death certificate where the informant happens to be a friend or a distant relative who may or may not be the best or most accurate source. So securing those supplementary records becomes even more important in those cases. So now we'll look at another type of record, church records. So church records are often, they can be a treasure trove of really valuable information. And civil registration or the state mandated vital records, those emerged relatively recently. So for events that predate the government's requirement for vital records, church records are going to be the next best thing. So the extent of availability for church records, it'll vary based on factors like the specific church denomination, geographic location, and in some cases, these records can span many decades or even centuries. And baptisms, marriages, and burials captured in church records can offer great insights into individuals and their relationships. And these records can contribute to establishing parental links and shedding light on the religious traditions of your ancestors. So to determine where you can find church records, you could look at things like obituaries, which we'll talk more about. So often they'll mention the name of the church where the funeral took place or the name of the minister who officiated the service. You could also take a look at things like local histories, and that might help you determine which churches were in the area at the time where your ancestors, or at the time when your ancestors lived there. So then you can start to look at the records and what might exist. So church records, they'll exhibit varying formats, and this is contingent on factors like the denomination, the date, and location. So displayed on the right are a couple of church records, and the one on the top is from Inman Presbyterian Church in Inman, South Carolina. So it's a register of elders, and my ancestors there on the second spot on the list. So the record doesn't detail his date of installation as an elder, but it does note the end of his service due to his death in 1963. So at first glance, this record is modest in content. There's not a lot there, but even seemingly insignificant records or records with not a lot of information, they still offer insights into your ancestors and still give you an idea of where your ancestors were, what they were doing with their time, what was important to them. So all of those little tidbits will add up to help create your family story. And below that is a Catholic marriage record. And this is a marriage between William Schmid and Mary Kruger, whose death certificate we saw on the last slide. And because it's a Catholic marriage, it's written in Latin. So there are some good tools available, so you don't have to necessarily study Latin to be able to extract some meaningful information from the record. And again, going back to Family Search, they have genealogical word lists for Latin and other languages. So and there are many other great translation tools online and here in our physical collection as well. So all of these tools can help you to identify some of the more common terms that you might find in genealogy records so that you can get the most out of the record. But looking here, we have the surnames of the couple at the left. The record says that the marriage took place on July 22nd, 1922. So if you look at his name under the date of the marriage, it doesn't look like William, and it's actually the Latin version of his name. So that's why that looks a little bit different. It says that he was from Norwood, son of Albert Schmid and Helena. It gives her name as Maria instead of Mary because that's the Latin version. And she was from Norwood and the daughter of August Bronner and Margaret Minton. So there's lots of good information available there. And then we'll shift over here to military records. So these also hold a lot of significance within genealogy. So maybe you're interested in tracing your lineage to a Civil War or Revolutionary War ancestor, or delving into some of the service details of your relatives during World War I or World War II. So there is an abundance of military records that are accessible online, but what is available is going to be dependent on the time period and the conflict being researched. So going back to the wiki pages again, you can use those to help identify the online sources for military records, or they can also inform you on how to acquire records that aren't online, like by making requests for military personnel files through the National Archives. So platforms like Fold3, those will enable you to discover pension files of Revolutionary War soldiers. Databases like Ancestry or MyHeritage provide access to materials like draft registration cards, as an example. So these records all provide valuable insights like birth information, next of kin details. So this record here is a World War II draft registration card for my great-grandmother. So his name and birth information listed here. In this case, he listed his mother as next of kin because he wasn't yet married. He listed employment information, so he noted that he was employed at the grocery store that the family owned, and then his signature appears there at the bottom of the card. So the reverse side of the card is, it gives particulars about the physical attributes. So in this case, 5'10", 170 pounds, hazel eyes, brown hair, and a light complexion. So gives you some interesting information there. So once you have traced your lineage back to your immigrant ancestor, your focus might shift towards locating a passenger list. And these provide information about your ancestors' arrival in the United States. So they'll list details like the individual's name, travel companions, if there were any, their final destination, and often the name of the hometown that they hailed from is included in these records. So that detail is especially important. And although knowing the country of origin is helpful, honing in on that specific town name, that's significant because it'll more easily allow you to continue your research and to trace your ancestors back to the old country, wherever that might be for you. So for this example, this passenger list is for an ancestor named Harry Fedgick, and he arrived in Ellis Island, which was the largest port of arrival, although there were a number of others. So I wanted to use this passenger list to highlight certain things that you might be on the lookout for or consider when searching immigration records. So the first thing would be his name. So during his time in the United States, he went by the name Harry, which is a very American sounding name. So if I search for him under that name, I won't get any results. But after a little bit of digging, I located him under the spelling at the top, Hyrn, which turned out to be a shortened version of the Ukrainian name Gregory. So But at the time of his arrival in 1905, the record indicated that he was 23 years old. He had $11, and this passenger list includes a question asking whether the individual had spent time in the United States previously, and he said that he had been in the country previously in 1902 and 1903. So this record gives me a clue there that I might go back and look for another passenger record for him around that time, and that might provide me with more information. So he says his intended destination was Missouri. He was going to reunite with his brother-in-law, and he provided the name of the brother-in-law on the record. And so this data is a good way to broaden your search and potentially discover more family connections. Under the race or people category, he identified himself as Ruthenian, and that was an older term that was used to identify Ukrainians or Slavs who were settled on the southern side of the Carpathian Mountains. So just by looking into that term alone and researching that term, that gave me a lot of good information about his identity and his origins. So he also disclosed his previous residence, which looked like Bronica in the record. And initially searching under that spelling, it yielded no results. But after I looked a little bit deeper into some of the historical context, I established that his hometown was known as Branica, which is a little village located within Ukraine's Lviv region. So similar to given names, town names are often misspelled in these records, and it might take some time to do a little digging and a little bit of additional exploring to identify the town. But the information from these passenger lists is a great place to start. Along with passenger lists, it's also important to explore potential naturalization records for your immigrant ancestors. So you'll find information on the National Archives website, which it provides insights into the process and available records. And the process and the records available are going to be dependent on when and where your ancestor naturalized. So these documents, they hold a lot of value because they contain information related to the person's identity and their origins, and you might find data like physical description, birth year, place of birth, which often features the town name. These records usually include the year of arrival and the ship's name as well. So these, again, are valuable because they have that information related to the identity, and then usually at the bottom of the document, you'll see your ancestor's signature, and it might even include a photo like the one here. So that's always an exciting find. But moving on to newspapers, historical newspapers play a huge role in genealogy. So when we consider newspapers in the context of genealogy research, we probably automatically think of obituaries, and obituaries definitely hold a lot of value because they can reveal the birth date and birthplace of the deceased. They might list surviving family members and their relationships, and sometimes they'll provide biographical details that can serve as good clues for continuing your research. But along with obituaries, you'll find birth and marriage announcements and other society news, and that can really help color the lives of your ancestors. So on the left, there's a little tidbit about Mary Marsh, who was a Red Cross nurse who was home visiting from Fort McHenry, where she'd been serving. It notes she was the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Charles Marsh of 21st Street. In the middle, there's a newspaper tidbit from the 1930s, where one of my ancestors had been to visit his brother-in-law or his brother in Hollywood, Florida, and he brought back a basket of oranges and he took them to the local newspaper office. So these seem like kind of unimportant details, but it's good to remember that historic newspapers functioned as the equivalent of today's Facebook. So these little newspaper tidbits can provide an insightful window into your ancestors' lives and really illustrates what they were doing, who they were with, and just how they were spending their time. So, and then on the right, there's an obituary for Laura J. Wilson, and dissecting obituaries that you find, those offer a lot as well. So this one states her age is 84 years, says she died at home following an illness of 2 years. So we know a little bit about her health leading up to her death. The obituary gives the name of the minister who officiated or celebrated the funeral service, as well as the name of the church, which was Brevard Methodist. So now we have a place that we might look into for possible church records. And then the obituary gives names of the children who survived her, as well as information about her husband who had preceded her in death in 1918. So with this information, we can look more into the children. We could look for a death record for her husband and an obituary for him. So also, according to this obituary, she was interred at the Davidson River Cemetery. So the next place you could look is within cemetery records. So we'll move over to those now. And these records are helpful for a variety of reasons, and one benefit is vital information. So cemetery records will usually include information like names, birth and death dates, and sometimes even marriage dates. And this can help you establish important events in your family tree and verify some of those relationships. So there are a couple of ways that you might find information. The first way is through the tombstone and markers for your ancestors. So tombstones and markers often contain inscriptions that might provide some additional information like nicknames or religious affiliations. Sometimes they'll even give details about their lives or accomplishments. So these can offer valuable insights into your ancestors' background. Often the Irish would inscribe the county of origin into their tombstones. So in this case, in the picture here, we can see that John Corboy had roots in County Tipperary, Ireland, and the date of his passing is noted. And then in the lower section, there was a Bible verse that was etched onto there, but that's faded quite a bit. So there's a lot that can be discerned just from looking at the tombstones. And mistakes do happen even on tombstones. So if possible, you want to try to find additional records to support the information that you find. Burial records also hold the potential to offer some good clues. And for instance, in cases where the individual passed away before formal documentation of deaths or births, establishing parentage might be a challenge. So interment records occasionally contain details like the names of the deceased parents, which can be helpful. So moving on to the last record type that we'll talk about for today, wills and probate records. So these are valuable because they'll give you information about the lives, relationships, and the possessions of your ancestors. So a will is a legal document that's created to outline how the individual wants their property and their assets to be distributed after their death. And wills will often include information about family members, associates, so it makes them an important resource for connecting your ancestors to each other when other records might not. So probate is the process where the court validates the will and it oversees the distribution of a person's estate. And probate records include documents like petitions, inventories, final settlements. So these records can provide information about heirs of the deceased, details about their possessions, and illustrate those relationships. So as we finish up, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things on our website quickly, which you can access at genealogycenter.org. So at the top right, you can search our catalog. But before diving into the catalog, you might want to check out our pathfinders. And hovering over snapshots, you can see that we have them for states, subjects, and international research. So this is an example of one we have for West Virginia. So these are selective lists of books from our collection on various topics that you might find helpful in your research, and they're divided by categories like research guides, biographical, church records. So they have call numbers on the left so that you can locate them while you're here. So these might be a good place to get you started and give you an idea of the scope of our collection. Going back to the main page, you can also click this pink button on the left labeled Our Resources, and that'll take you to this page where you can take a look at our databases. So there are two choices: free databases or on-site. Free databases are the ones you can access from home or from wherever you are, and that'll include things like our military heritage database, our African American Gateway, our microfilm catalog, family Bible records, and things like that. Our on-site databases, those will include licensed databases like Ancestry, MyHeritage, Family Search. So we have 23 on-site databases that you can use while you're here in the Genealogy Center for free. So we invite you to explore our website and our resources there. And so don't be afraid to ask questions, and we're happy to help. You're welcome to send us an email. Our email is listed here, or visit us in person, and we'll be glad to help with identifying resources and getting you started. So with that, I think we'll see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Kate. That was awesome. So there are a few questions, so let's start going through them. So the first one talks about family search and using it efficiently. You know, there is at least one class that we've done that's in our YouTube on family search, and then family search does have tutorials. Do you have any other advice, Kate?
I would, before getting into the main search page on family search, I think it's good to explore the research wikis. So that helps you, helps you kind of focus, I think. So looking at the research wiki page for the place where you're researching might be a good starting point, and checking out those tutorials, like you said.
Yeah, sometimes the organization at hand has the best information. I'm going to go ahead and put that research wiki link into the chat so everybody has access to it. So then there's one question about their great-grandma was born in the back of a covered wagon. Were such births recorded somewhere? This was in Missouri Territory.
It was probably not formally recorded at that time, but you might look like in local histories or maybe church records to see if you could find some record of the birth, but it's likely that there wasn't a formal recording of that birth.
Thank you. And I will also repeat Kate's suggestion of the research wiki on family search for this one too, because they let you know when they started keeping those records, which is really helpful. Where do you find burial records?
It depends. So if you know the cemetery, like if it's a Catholic cemetery, for example, there might be a cemetery association, or for a Catholic cemetery, you might contact the diocese, and they'll usually have the records there that they can send to you. They might be online, so you could check the research wiki, or when you're on Family Search and you click the search button and it gives you that drop-down menu, there's also an option to pick the catalog, so you can search for the place where the cemetery is located, and some cemetery records are available online that way. So you can check there first, and then if they're not online, the next best thing would be to contact the cemetery office or association, or the church if it's a church cemetery. So
Perfect. Thank you.
thank you.
There is one last question that I saw in the chat, which I thought was actually pretty good. Do you have the website up by chance on your screen?
I can pull it up. Yeah.
Okay. You want to pull that up really quick, our website, and share?
Yes.
Make it a little easier so people have a visual. Okay, so from our website, can you show how to get to the databases free and the on-site?
Yes. So when you're here at the Genealogy Center homepage, you'll click on this button here on the left for our resources, and that'll take you here. So there are drop-down menus for free databases, and these are the ones that you'll be able to access from home or from wherever you are. So most of those are materials from our collection that we've digitized, like our military heritage database or family Bible records. On-site databases are the ones that are licensed. So Ancestry, Find My Past, My Heritage, those will all be listed here, and you can use those while you're here in person at the Genealogy Center.
Perfect. Thank you. Someone's asking, are those online databases all US only?
No, there's a wide variety. So like Find My Past, that's a UK-based database, so it focuses on Scottish, British, Irish research. There's Archive Digital, and that is Swedish. There's Canada's Heritage, which focuses on Canadian newspapers. So there's a variety, and we have the international edition of Ancestry, and you can access international records on My Heritage as well. So,
and then there's not a question about this, but I think it's good to show people. Can you show where the digitized books are in the family archive?
yes. So if you go back to our main page, this button, Family History Archives, you can click here, and there are links here to Family Search, to the digital library, or Internet Archive. So we make public domain portions of our collection available online, so books that are out of copyright. So if you click on the Internet Archive link, for example, it'll take you right to our collection. Hopefully it'll pop up, but it'll let you search in our collection and view those digitized books. So it's not wanting to work for me right now, but
it's okay. The biggest thing to note is that those books can be international or US based. It really just depends on what's out of copyright. And there's the Family Search one.
yes.
Okay, so last question, and this is a loaded one. Is there any value in paying for membership in groups such as Mayflower Descendants?
I don't know that I'm the best person to answer that.
It's a loaded
That's a
question.
good question.
I think it depends. I think it depends upon what your wants and needs are as an individual. Like Kate, are you in any lineage societies?
I'm not. I've explored joining the DAR, but have not done so yet. So
I'm a member of the DAR, and I joined because I wanted to see if I could. It was a challenge. So it really depends if that's something that you really feel intent on and want to do, go for it, because it costs money and it costs time. So each individual needs to make their own decisions. And DAR is Daughters of the American Revolution. So I think that should answer that question. Well, I think that's enough for today. Do you have anything else that you wanted to show people on our website really quickly before we go?
Um, Let me go back here. So on our website, if you click on this blue button for our services, you can find our email address there. It's genealogy@acpl.info. And so feel free to send us an email, send us questions. We're glad to help, or come visit us.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kate. That was wonderful. And
Thank you.
looks like everybody enjoyed it. So thank you everybody for joining us today. We hope that you will join us on Thursday for our program as well. So thank you and have a great rest of your day, everyone.